everyone, and welcome to Illuminated Movement Astrology. I am your astrologer, Nikki, here to talk today about the last eclipse in 2024. So, eclipse season this fall has been quite intense. Have you noticed? We had an eclipse about 2 weeks ago in the sign of Pisces, and this upcoming eclipse on October the 2nd will be in the sign of Libra. Oh, so emotions running high on this eclipse. They typically are for eclipses anyway, because there's so much energy being pushed to the earth and being pushed in towards us to work with. But this one also has a loaded Grand Water Trine with the rulers of the North and South Node part of that water trine. Don't worry, I won't use jargon the whole time, but we will take a look at the chart and break it down and see how can we best work with these energies and pull them into our own lives in order to work with our own soul's evolution in the best ways possible. So let's take a look at the chart. All right, so looking at the chart for this solar eclipse. So for those of you that have been following me for a little while, you know that I like to explain what's going on so that you guys can understand what we're talking about when you say things like solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, squares, things of that nature, so that you can actually use this information in your life and not just have all these random weird astrology jargon words just being thrown at you and you're like, great, that's nice, but what do I actually do with it? So when we're looking at the solar eclipse here up at the top in the sign of Libra, we're talking about the sun and the moon being side by side in conjunction, okay, like peanut butter and jelly. So when we see that side by side 10 degrees of Libra eclipse, we know that this is a solar eclipse. So the lunation that was 2 weeks ago, right? It's that last lunar eclipse. Remember, the sun and the moon were on opposite sides. It was a full moon, and that's why it was a lunar eclipse. So for this one, we're looking at the sun and the moon together like peanut butter and jelly with one of the nodes. We've got the south node in this case in Libra right next to the eclipse. Okay, and that's what's making it an eclipse. So we have that happening. And we also have our friend Mercury over here at 11 degrees. So lot of energy, powerful energy side by side, meaning it's amplifying, it's illuminating a little extra this mercurial kind of energy on this eclipse. So what do I mean by mercurial energy? We're talking about messages, right? Mercury is the messenger god. That's part of what he does, what his actions are as a planet, is he brings us messages, understanding, communication, learning, all kinds of different ways. We're talking about Libra, so we're talking about things that could have to do with relationships. Remember, all of the air signs, which are Libra, Gemini, and Aquarius, they're all social. That's part of what they do. Okay, but Libra has to do with a little bit more of our one-on-one kinds of communications. So that could be an intimate relationship, it could be a business partner, it could be a best friend, something of that nature. We're talking about how we relate to other people on a one-on-one basis, right? How do we negotiate that space where there's a me and there's a you and together there's a we? What do we do with that? So if you think back to October of last year, all the way to 2023, we had a solar eclipse as well in Libra. Now, things have been a little wild over the last year, I'd say. I think that's fair to say, right? And we've been growing a lot in the Libra and Aries parts of our charts. Okay, if you have planets in those areas of your charts, particularly around this degree range over here, right? This kind of 11 to 6, you could go a little bit further out on each side. You're going to be feeling this a lot more. Okay. If you don't, that's okay. This could be things that are happening more out in the world and maybe not quite as personal to you. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at how we are growing and developing in our own individual journey. Okay, when we're talking about the North Node in Aries, we're talking about how do we assert ourselves? How do we have desires? Do we have any desires? What makes us get up in the morning? Right? Let's put the fire in our belly so that we can go out and engage with life. We wake up, we get a new day, and we get to say yes to life. And for some people, that's been really challenging over the last several years, right? Part of what we are dealing with here as well is how do we work with one another, right? Regardless of whether or not you're in a partnership or have been or never have been, we still have to relate to other people out in the world, right? We have to negotiate things. And right now, there's a lot of energy in these spaces of people, in a sense, being pitted against one another, right? There's a lot of disagreements. There's a lot of disharmony, which Libra is not a huge fan of, right? That's not the higher expression of Libra. It's one of the lower expressions of Libra, but it is an expression nonetheless. So Libra, the scales, trying to find balance, right? And if you've ever tried to balance, let's say on one leg, it's not necessarily super easy, especially if you add something like if you were to be one of those amazing circ people who stands on the ball, right? And balances on it. That's really hard. And that's kind of what's going on with this eclipse, especially when we look at this big blue triangle in the middle of the chart here, this Grand Water Trine, which I'll get to in a moment. Really almost having to stand on this like big ball of emotions. And how do we balance on that? What do we do with that? How adept are we? Now, we might be really adept at this, especially because we've been working on this now for a little over a year, this kind of energy. And so we might be like, okay, when I first was standing on this and trying to negotiate, trying to figure out how to make space for you and for me and like the us that has to be together, that I really can feel like I can stand on this ball and I can balance and I can be pretty confident here. Hopefully that's the case. If that's not the case, this eclipse is going to bring a lot of messages around how well we are able, again, to balance or not. So if you're in the not category, that's okay too, right? We have this idea that everything has to be mastered and perfected like the first time, and that's just not true. So if you're still like trying to even stand on the ball for a second and try to balance something for a second, great. If you can do it for a second, amazing. If you can do it for 3 seconds, amazing, right? If you're there for 10 minutes, amazing. Just celebrate where you are, and hopefully you can get something more out of this, right? When we tend to just sit down and beat ourselves up because things aren't going the way that we hoped they would, we really can put ourselves in quite a pickle. So if you're able to stand back and look for what are the messages here? What have I been learning, or what do I need to continue to learn, right? What have I maybe, oh, aha, now I know why I can't balance and I'm falling over. Now I know why when I go to stand up for myself at work because I'm not getting credit for the project that I put my blood, sweat, and tears in, and someone else on wasn't even on the project is getting credit. Like, wait a minute, how do I navigate that? If you've been working in this way of there's a you, there's a me, and there's a we, how do I balance this? Hopefully you'll get to practice it, or at least, again, get that mercurial light bulb, that aha moment that says, oh, I see now. I see where I need to do something better. Okay. I feel like this eclipse, it's interesting because solar eclipses tend to be a little bit more kind of external, right? This has a little bit more of that externalized yang kind of energy, that exhale kind of energy. But I do also feel like there's quite an internal component here as well. So for some of you, this will be things like actually happening out in the world, like you've been trying to negotiate a contract for a long time, or maybe you're in a relationship and it needs to end, or it's on the verge of beginning, right? It might be something like that. For others of you, it's going to be a lot more internal. It's going to be more of those like, oh, wow, I understand myself better now. And I understand how I am when I relate to things around me better, or I'm still working on it, right? Or I'm getting these ideas. So it could be anything in those kinds of realms. And why I say there's also this internal emotional component is this Grand Trine and Mars getting a lot of the energy from not only this eclipse, but also because it's part of this Grand Trine and it's the ruler of this North Node. So it's a ton of things I just said. Right? So let's break those down a bit. Let's talk about this internal world. So we're talking about the emotional realm of Scorpio, Cancer, and Pisces. And the planets that are currently in the sky sitting here are Venus, Mars, and Saturn. And if you look at the degrees, little numbers that are next to them, right? 11, 15, and 14, they're making this big triangle in the sky called a Grand Water Trine. So we have this blue energy with those triangles. So what does trine energy mean? So we have conjunction, right? They're side by side. They're amplifying each other's energy, like this eclipse up here. When we're talking about trines, we're talking about energies that are harmonious. They flow, right? That could be flowing in a good way. That could be flowing in a way where you feel like, wow, I don't really like the way this is going. But nonetheless, it's going to flow easily. So we're talking about trines. We're also talking about things of the same element, in this case, water. So what does water have to do with? Well, it has to do with things that are intangible, right? It's a lot more of our inner world, how we emotionally experience life. And that's not something that other people necessarily get, right? That's really real to us on an internal level. Yes, we can externalize it and we can voice things and we can interact with other people, of course. But really, our experiences are unique to us, and they're things that are going on inside of us all the time. How we feel emotionally attached to something or not is also unique to us. And yes, we can find people that share in those things, right? So we've got this emotional component, we've got this intuitive potentially component, we've got this ability to tap into things that are intangible, right? An emotion is itself is not tangible, right? And intuitive guidance itself is not tangible. Something else has to interact with it out in the world, or we need to take action on it to get it more materialized in that kind of sense. And we're talking about this emotional realm, these planets, Venus, what do we find attractive? What do we magnetize? What do we want to draw into us, right? Mars, what are we passionate about? What gets us up in the morning? What drives us to move forward, right? Or also, what do we defend, right? It's the place in our lives where we can also stand up to the bullies. Okay. Saturn, the great patience teacher. Saturn teaches us that timing is everything, right? And then we have to work for what we want. And we're going to come up against obstacles that ultimately help us grow. So we've got those three energies working together, working in connection, flowing together, right? What do we find? What do we want that's attractive in a deep way? Scorpio is deep, 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 right? Scorpio is the depths of the depths of the depths from which the phoenix dies and ultimately is reborn. Scorpio's intense. If you are a Scorpio or you know a Scorpio, you know what I'm talking about. They're incredibly intense and typically on a very internal level. They don't necessarily always show you their emotional depths. They have a tendency to keep it to themselves, right? Not always, but often that's the case. So we've got our Venus sitting there. What is driving us deeply, emotionally, passionately? What do we feel connected to now? Right? Then we have Mars. Mars is traditionally the ruler of Scorpio. So Mars over there, Venus is associated, right, with Libra and with Taurus. Venus and Scorpio is not necessarily super comfortable. So that Venus part of us is going to have to stretch a little bit. It's going to have to work in ways that are a little bit more unconventional, a little bit more outside of our comfort zone, a little more outside the box. So if you're finding yourself being drawn to those kinds of things and you're thinking, this is unusual, right? For me, I'm usually a vanilla person. And why do I all of a sudden want like chocolate swirl? Great. Go for it. See what's in there for you, even if that's a little bit uncomfortable. Okay. You're going to get something out of it. When we look at Mars, what are we passionate about? What are we wanting to drive forward? What are we wanting to put our energy into? Right? What drives us forward in Cancer? Now, Mars also is uncomfortable in the sign of Cancer. It's not where he's normally associated with being, right? He's in charge of Aries and Scorpio. Aries and Scorpio, if you know any Aries or Scorpios, they're intense in very different ways, right? Aries tends to be upfront intense. They're kind of bold and a little bit maybe assertive / aggressive and kind of just really out there, right? They're the ones that are blunt and will tell you what they think, right? Scorpio will too eventually. So we have that in this sensitive sign of Cancer, right? Cancer that has to do with what do we encircle? What do we protect? What do we nurture? The beautiful part here is that Mars can really, really help us to pour more passion into the things that we are trying to grow, that we are trying to get to maturity, that we are trying to actualize. If we're able to tap into that in a way where we don't get carried away with our emotions. Because Mars in Cancer can get crabby, right? It can just get like emotionally over the top, sensitive in ways where we might be taking little off the cuff things as some bigger deal than it is slight against us, right? And then we have to get the crab claws out and then just we have to get into that, right? If you've ever been part of a family situation, let's think of, maybe a family gathering where that kinds of thing tends to happen, right? That can go on. So watching out for the moodiness of ourselves and others. Again, people are going to be a little bit more emotionally intense on this eclipse. Not necessarily because of that Libra and that Aries energy, but because of this water energy and Mars ruling that north node, but being in Cancer, right? So watching out for where we may be getting overly triggered, where we don't need to be, right? And how instead can we use this Mars energy to funnel into something that is meaningful for us? How can we move forward on our dreams or the things that we want to see be actualized in the world? How can we do that? How can we potentially make peace with our family situations, or whether that's family of origin, or whether that's seeking out a chosen family? Part of this Cancer energy is looking for what feels like home, what feels like family, what makes me feel comforted and nurtured and loved and protected for myself as well. How do I emotionally fulfill myself? So give Mars something positive to do. If you're feeling crabby and cranky and frustrated, what are you not paying attention to for yourself? Right? Like, my partner should be doing X, Y, and Z for me, maybe, but maybe you're not communicating that, or maybe it's something that you actually need to be doing for yourself. Because sometimes Cancer and Libra, they can both get kind of lazy and expect other people to do all the heavy lifting. Okay, so we want to watch out for that, especially because we've got, again, Mars ruling this north node in Aries and Venus ruling over this whole eclipse here. Now, Mars is going to have kind of an interesting say here, because Mars is not only part of the rulership of the nodes, he's squared to the nodes, meaning he's making a dynamic energy. Something's pushing up, something is needing to change, is needing to be addressed, is needing to be looked at. When we're talking about square energy, there's a tension there that we need to pay attention to so that we can grow. Okay, it's like a sprout pushing up against soil. If it doesn't pop through the soil, it's not going to sprout. Okay, but pushing up against the soil it's effort, right? It might be uncomfortable, it might be frustrating, but nevertheless, it needs to be done to get to that next level. So there's something here that we need to push through, that we need to work through, hopefully in a productive way. Maybe it's unproductive. That's okay. That can be a blessing in disguise too. Sometimes it just takes a little bit longer, right? We're talking about Saturn too, so it might be a delay of something. But when we're looking at that Cancer energy, Cancer also rules over the moon. So there's a lot of energy with this Mars here. So be on the lookout for, again, things that might be making you feel a little bit crabby or out of sorts. How can you get in touch with the emotional messages, right? Mercury here, even though Mercury in an air sign isn't necessarily emotional, we have to also be able to figure out, what are our emotional signals? What is it trying to tell us? Right? When you feel joy, that's giving you a message. When you feel jealousy, that's giving you a message. When you feel frustration, it's a message. When you feel elation, it's a message. When you feel peace, right? So what are those messages? What are they trying to tell you? How can you integrate your mind and heart right now? Okay, in a really big way. And then again, if we look at that Saturn energy just briefly down here in Pisces, Saturn's not comfortable really in Pisces either. So that's a Jupiter ruled sign traditionally, right? Or in the modern, we are talking about Neptune. But really, Saturn wants things structured, it wants them crystallized, it wants things to kind of be more tangible, it wants things maybe its own way. And here we are in Pisces, where Pisces is very sacrificial at times. It's talking about being boundless. It's talking about the great big questions of, spirituality, whatever that means for you, or the big, like the quantum science kinds of questions. That's been really, really big, right? With Saturn and Pisces here. Having this kind of dissolving quality, like really trying to build something, but it's like the tide keeps coming in and washing away my sandcastle, right? Keep showing up and rebuilding. Okay. Figuring out what you can do better. The tide will eventually change, right? Saturn is going to move out of Pisces eventually. Or there's maybe a message here that you need to stop building a sandcastle where the tide's coming in. Maybe build it up a little bit higher somewhere else. Or just understand that everything's ephemeral, right? This too shall pass. So, wherever you are with your emotional state, it will pass, right? This eclipse will be over in a few days. Its energy will carry for a couple of years, but what can you do in the meantime to make the most out of how you have grown in the last year or so in how you relate to the things around you? How is that going? How are you balancing your life? How are you doing well or not? Right? If we're talking about an underfunction, we could be talking about, again, doing things like people pleasing tendencies. Oh, I just won't speak up and say anything at work, even though, Susie Q got all the credit for the job that I did. Again, well, it'll be fine. Maybe it's not fine, right? Maybe it's not fine. So maybe you need to speak up and say, so proud of Susie Q. Also, I did X, Y, and Z, or whatever the case may be, right? We could talk about an Well, I guess actually that's more of an overfunction than an underfunction. Sorry, I was thinking opposite. I love when my brain flips things. So that's probably more actually an overfunction, excuse me, of that Libra energy. An underfunction would be really going more towards that Aries side and saying, you know what? Susie's always making everything about her. How can I get her, kind of in some sense, like, how can I like twist the situation around so that Susie looks bad and I finally look good? Right? Or how can I just blurt out in my meeting that, Susie's a terrible person and why are we always paying attention to her, and just fire her already and give me all the credit? Probably not the best way to handle that situation, right? That's a little bit on the immature side. So how can we be more mature? How can we be more balanced? How can we negotiate things, whether we're talking about overfunction or underfunction? How can we figure that out? Okay. This may be something, again, it depends. It's going to be different for everyone. That has to do with potentially relationship matters. It is Libra. It could also have to do something with family or with a project. I'm getting strong for a lot of you, some kind of project that you're trying to get off the ground, something, whether that's in relationship to your home or your business or a creative project. I'm really getting that message strong. So for whoever that's for, if there's something that you've been wanting to do, put in the time. Saturn rewards consistent effort over time. And since he's part of this Grand Water Trine, I know he's not really directly related strongly to this eclipse, but this eclipse can give us the energy, the springboard to make a big leap forward. And we're talking about learning, we're talking about making connections, we're talking about, maybe you've been wanting to write a book. Well, sit down and start writing it. Get those emotions out on paper, or get your emotions out of the way, right? If they're holding you back, or find the things that are passionate and really put some energy into them, right? That's also going to bring balance to your life. If you're doing all the right things, but you're having no fun in your life, right? That's out of balance. Libra really wants beauty in life, right? It wants harmony, it wants things, and whatever that means to you, it's going to mean something different for everyone, which is so beautiful. But what does that mean for you? Look at your life and take a look at what is out of whack here. You're going to know if you ask yourself, you ask your body, you ask your intuition, whatever that is for you, you're going to know, right? Whether, again, it's that relationship, maybe it's some habits, maybe it's some things that, again, you're expecting other people to do all the heavy lifting, right? Or maybe it's you that's doing all the heavy lifting and you're watching people sit on a chaise lounge eating grapes and you're like, what the heck, right? Take a look at that. Take a look at your emotional world. What is going on there? Take a look at what you've learned and what you still have to learn and to integrate. And again, how you can pull this all together. So that's a lot of energy for this eclipse. Again, it'll be personal to you depending on where this is landing in your own particular chart or whatever planets this could be hitting. But in a general sense, like, how are we doing in the balancing act? It's a lot. How do we feel emotionally connected or disconnected? How are we negotiating our lives and our space, and what brings us joy? What makes us feel connected to other people, to projects, to our families, chosen or a blood relative, whatever that means. Where have you been over the last year and how far you've come? And I guarantee you, if you look back for a year, you'll see, even if it's like, the most minute centimeter of progress, there's something there, right? Maybe it's a lot. Maybe you're like, wow, I am a completely different person since this last year, right? That could be true too. So, woo, emotional, power packed, very powerful eclipse to close out eclipse season of 2024. I hope that was helpful. Let me know what you think in the comments. I do read them and I try my best to answer them if you do ask a question. I can't comment on personal situations that you're going through because that's not appropriate on, the internet, but in a general sense, I will do my best to answer questions that you have. Either way, I hope you have a fantastic and wonderful eclipse. Until next time, take care. Bye bye.